So my talk is on debugging, and debugging really is about problem solving. And how do we really solve problems when we're in programming? Because we always come up against these things, and a lot of the time we think of them as being irritations, but actually I think they're really interesting things to approach. Obviously when I'm not bashing my head against the wall, you can take quite an academic approach to this stuff. So I've got a short little video here. Don't know if the sound's going to work. Who here has watched Breaking Bad? Who here loves Breaking Bad? Okay, great. Who remembers Bryan Cranston from his previous role, Malcolm in the Middle? All right. So this is how I think programmers go about their work.
Replace that light bulb in the kitchen?
What does it look like I'm doing?
Right, so that's what it's about, right? So, okay, focus is a big thing. The first step in solving any problem is isolating its causes. So if you have a really complicated system and something's broken, it could be in a million places, right? So it's usually helpful to eliminate what it's probably not. Okay. So I find that the key to problem isolation is reduction. And there's several different ways that you can reduce the scope in which you're trying to solve a problem. So the first thing is reduce the solution scope. I kind of just said that, screwed up. So when you reduce the solution scope, if you have a big system that you're trying to solve a small problem inside of, it's very important that you actually find out where the core of that problem is lying. It seems pretty obvious, but sometimes if you're working in a complicated system, you can think that it's in any number of places. So find what you're doing and then be able to iterate quickly so that you can try and solve the problem. If it's taking 5-10 minutes between iterations to see if the change that you've applied is actually trying to fix the bug or is changing what you're seeing, that's not a good situation. So you need to reduce that iteration time down as low as possible. Reduce the complexity, so try and simplify that problem right down. In complicated systems, you obviously have a number of interdependent pieces, and that can cause a real problem for problem solving. And reduce the frustration levels. I find that I'm a smoker, so there's one way to do it. There's other ways that are slightly dirtier. So reduce your frustration levels. What's wrong with this code? Now, you guys looked at this for 1 second, and you immediately knew that it was bad. But why? Okay. Side pyramid, fine. What else? All right. Well, look, it's from a website called codecrap.com, so that's your first indication. Okay. There's a few reasons why this code sucks. If this is anybody's code, not my problem. So, bad code structure. Right, this is not a very easy way to read this code or to structure it and to maintain. Localization, how on earth would you, if Jan is going to be using your site and it's in Canadian French, how are you going to give error messages for that? It's just going to make your code so much more complicated. What else is there? Hard to track down the cause of issues, difficult to read, reliance on post, the list goes on and on and on. So an example of reducing the solution scope in here would be, well, say we've encountered a situation where we're having a problem with people choosing the right usernames. So if we have a look at the code that was doing that in the previous example, that is pretty much sitting here, okay, after going through multiple steps, okay. Now this code isn't like so terrible that it won't work, but it just screws with your mind. So it's doing some regular expression between 2 and 64 characters, only alphanumeric and numbers, right? Case insensitive. So that's what that pattern is doing. But if we've got a problem with that, we've got so many other things to contend with. We've got to check that our email address is right, that our password new is equal to our password repeat. And when we're trying to test this, we've got to actually send through a post every time. And that's going to make it kind of hard. So just take all that code out and simplify it. It does exactly the same thing, but now it's not part of the whole system, and this becomes easier to isolate. Reducing iteration time. So we had a reliance on post before, but now we've just abstracted that and moved that into a data object. And now we can run it through here much more easily. Instead of loading up a browser, loading up the web page, filling in the form, submitting it, and then trying it that way. I personally prefer going to a test. So if we wanted to test the usernames, then we could go something like this. We could provide a whole bunch of usernames. And the way that I've done this is I've got a number of expectations for all of these different usernames, and they all try and exploit different ways that the password could not be accepted. So that one's true, right? PHP South Africa, good, yay. I like cheese, not great because it's got the exclamation mark. Something with an umlaut, no, right? Because this guy hated people from Germany, I guess. This is just too long. Some silly username that is incredibly long and will fail validation immediately, okay? Empty passwords and one with numbers is fine. So if we have a test like this, we can run through the test, assert that what we're expecting and what we're giving are equivalent. Now this is a version of the code that I've created based on that crazy code crap pyramid, okay? So who thinks, and this is not about the code that I can write, but who thinks that this is a better way to read the code than the previous one? By show of hands. Okay. Right? Because it's clear now. You're defining all of your things up front. You're not having these crazy nested if statements. And if you feel like I'm talking crap, please put up your hand and shout out. Interaction is encouraged. But if I'm in the middle of the joke, shut the fuck up. So, so over here, it's really simple to see the kind of rules that we're applying instead of having nested if statements. Laravel has a great validation framework. This one is called Valitron. And it makes it easy to say, let's define some rules and then apply that to certain fields that we're expecting. And it just adds to code readability, to code reuse, to new people joining, to going back later on. One thing my computer teacher taught me in high school, which was like yesterday, not really, is always code for the next guy, because the next guy will more than likely be you, okay? Unless you're working in a big team, in which case, yeah. So that I think is a way to reduce complexity. Frustration levels. Get away from the computer. You get so focused on the solution, but you don't see the problem anymore. You just don't see the problem. Try a different approach, bitch to a colleague, or start smoking. Or eat apples, because you're going to live for until the end of time. So just do something to get away from the computer that compels you. Smoking Walter White's crystal meth, whatever it is that's going to force you biologically or through some kind of outside influence to get away from your computer when all you want to do is solve this problem. Very, very important, I find anyway. So reduce to resolve is another tip there. What is this? Unicorn? Other guesses? No guesses? Okay, wrong. It's a one-horned oryx. Okay, but there's a great sort of medical aphorism that goes: if you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a zebra. Okay, I changed it to unicorn and I threw in a one-horned oryx because I'm weird. But it's a very clever kind of aphorism, because if you see a problem, don't immediately assume that it's something terribly complex, right? If you hear hoofbeats, don't think it's a unicorn. It's much more likely to be a horse, right? Or one of your colleagues being silly. So always consider that when you're trying to solve a problem, because usually the problems that we solve aren't actually so hard. We've missed a semicolon somewhere, or there's a space before the PHP tags, or something that's small but has big effects, especially if you're working in large, complicated systems. So I've started a project on GitHub called the Debugging Checklist. Surprise, surprise. And you can really think of it as a blame list, okay? And please, if you're going to contribute, please use this link here. And Chris Hartshey's committed one thing, so I was really cool about that because he's super grumpy, and so am I. So if we go down this list, I'm not going to read it all, but it sort of shows you that there are various levels of blame that you can assign to bugs. You can blame yourself, blame your framework, blame your tools, blame your environment, blame your language, blame the world, right? So we're going to go through all of those, but the order of likelihood really is that it's you. It's almost always you, okay? We're not perfect, we're human beings, even though we code for a living, like we screw up all the time. The other day I was doing a system, I was coding a system and there was some part of it that was using UUIDs. Does anybody know what a UUID is? Right, 36 byte sort of random string. And I was checking to see if it was equal to 36 characters. Oh, then that must be a UUID. Wrong, something else could be equal to 36 characters, right? So that was a really stupid problem and I couldn't figure it out. And I was blaming AngularJS and then I was blaming Laravel and it was me, okay? But maybe that's because I'm dumb. The order of probability goes really, really down from there. So frameworks are typically written by people who are smarter than you, so accept that. And they are usually better tested, and because they're community driven for the most part, everybody likes being a contrarian, and they say, meh, you know, that doesn't work, let's write a test for it and fix it up. So it's usually fairly well tested and battle tested quite well, so less likely to be in the framework. Your tools, right? If you're seeing some kind of weird situation going on and it's not you, you've made sure of that somehow, and it's not your framework, then maybe it's your tools, maybe it's IE. That would be right up there. But for other things, it's usually not the tools. The environment. I once got stuck in a situation where APC was caching something and I had not set up the configuration myself. Bad sign. And I was just getting a really, really strange problem in my project. 2 days later, realized it's APC, nearly slit my wrists. So, next step, environment. Next step, language. Really, really, really unlikely to be a language bug, right? If Facebook's using it and they haven't found it yet, probably not a bug. And then blame the world because, you know, if 1 + 1 does not equal 2 anymore, if that's the level where you're getting to with your bug, I've had that before where not necessarily 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 anymore, but it just feels that way when you get stuck really deep in a problem. Then that can be a time to blame the world and maybe lose it all. So now on to tools. But before I dive there, tools are really, really, really handy. That's why they're called tools. And my favorite tool is PHP Storm. We don't have a representative from JetBrains here, but if we did, because they're sponsoring this event, and I'm not a corporate shill, I just love their software. If there was one here, I shit you not, I would give them a hug right now. Okay, but who uses PHP Storm? My show of hands. Why are they all on this side of the room? I like you guys. Thanks for coming. So, okay, so what do you guys use? Vim? What else? NetBeans, okay. Okay, all right. Hi. Okay, no, that's perfectly fine. PHP Storm, for me personally, I like it. But I like using an IDE because IntelliSense, right? So often, before I started using an IDE, I found that I was seeing so many common problems that I could have picked up in an IDE. And so when I started using one, there's less cognitive work, right? And I'm not a terribly bright guy, and I don't have a terribly good memory. So that really helps, okay? Syntax highlighting, linting of the language, that really helps you spot problems before they even occur, okay? And your memory sucks. And as a programmer, your memory can suck. Who here has written a test where they ask you to list the order of variables in a function? Or you need to know that by rote? Has anybody ever done a test like that? So lame. Have you ever coded in a situation where you don't have access to Google? Right? Or your IDE? Right? It's just not how programming works. So you can have a crap memory. That's totally fine. Refactoring makes a massive difference. And because, like I said, I'm not a particularly bright guy and I don't have a good memory, refactoring in an IDE makes a lot of sense that way, because I can change a class in 99% of the project, and then you get right down to the end of it, and it's like, oh, damn, missed that one class, and then it all just blows up and collapses into a pile of something smelly. So, and it's got integration with Fing, PHP unit, Bhat, things like that. Xdebug. Another amazing, amazing, amazing tool. I do not know what I would do without Xdebug. Who here uses Xdebug on a regular basis? Okay, okay. So this is what Xdebug looks like in PHP Storm. It's really, really neat. This is some of the code that I was showing you earlier. We can see that we're... Oh, first of all, who doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about when I speak about Xdebug? Besides Theo. All right. So Xdebug is a way for you to inspect the code at runtime. So it allows you to see what the state of your program is at a particular point in time. And this lovely pink line is a breakpoint. And so we've stopped the execution of the program at this point. And now we can see what all of the variables are equal to. So we're passing in the expected value and the username, and we can see them there. We can also add watch expressions to do other calculations. So that's really, really handy. Who here uses source control management? Or doesn't? Okay, who doesn't use source control? Okay, no murders have to happen. All right, who uses Git specifically? SVN? All right, Mercurial? Interesting. Bazaar? Nobody from Ubuntu. All right. So, Git is great, and GitHub is one of our sponsors, so yay for them. They're awesome. This is a tool for Mac called SourceTree. And if you are not a command line gosu and you're a mere mortal like I am, then using a GUI for Git is really great. And please don't look too carefully at this, because this is one of the projects that I'm doing, and you probably don't want to see all the history of that. But using that is great, because oftentimes you find that when you spot a bug, it could just be a regression from something that was previously working. And then Git has a great feature where you can go back and blame somebody, right? Or you can go to a specific line in a file. You can say, who changed this last? And where do they live, right? So, right? So really, really, really handy to see, oh, okay, so when did we add this dependency into the project? Because that screwed everything up. So if we roll right back to over here, then that's going to be great. We can get back to where we were and hopefully solve that bug. It's probably the first thing that I go to when I do have a bug and I'm working in a team. Very important for a team environment to use source control. Who here uses any form of HTTP proxy? Right, who here does front-end and back-end? Way too few hands in the previous question. So this is a tool called Charles Proxy, and it allows you to inspect the traffic that is going from your web browser to your server. And it's really, really handy, because you can inspect the request, inspect the response, have a look at the run times. If you're using SSL, you can see how long that's all taking to do the handshakes and all of that good stuff. And you can manipulate it. So instead of going into the browser every time, you can just come in here and just press the little pencil and then change the variables up and shoot it through. So that's great. Who here can't install Xdebug on their current environment? Their boss won't let them, they've got a vindictive colleague. Has anybody had trouble installing Xdebug? Or can't use Xdebug for any reason? No? So then should I just skip the next slide? So this is a tool called Kint. No comment. And this is what it looks like. So if you have some code and then you run dd, that is kind of like var dump, right? Who uses var dump, var export, print r, all of that sort of stuff? Handy, right? But the output is almost always horrible, okay? So this tool makes it really nice. It throws some extra CSS and JavaScript, I think, into the mix, and gives you an inspectable way to view your variables. when you print them out. And so if you don't have Xdebug for whatever reason, or it's just too much of a mission to install, or that crazy guy at the conference didn't explain it properly, then use this. One of the other big things about problem solving is using the right language. Not talking about PHP, I think we're all sold on that. But finding out, how the hell do we Google for this? Right? Who can see the problem here? Who did PHP 4 at one time? Then you should spot the problem. Yeah? Yes, thank you. So if the constructor is named the same as the class, or if a function is named the same as a class, then PHP, because of its backwards compatibility, sees that as a constructor. So when I was preparing for this talk and I was putting together some unit tests and made sure that they run, in case any of you interrogate me afterwards to see if all of this was bullshit, I was trying this and I could not figure out why this was working. And so, I was getting this issue, missing argument 1 for test. What on earth is going on, right? So what would be the search term that we would use to try and solve this if we didn't all have Hannes Magnussen's incredible brain, right? What would be the search term? Who's got some ideas? Please shout them loud so I can hear. What? WTF? Wouldn't solve anything, but it's very cathartic. Okay, so I would say, hey? Oh, yeah, probably some unexpected results that way. So I would say use PHP unit missing argument data provider. So what I did was I took this code and I thought, well, this is all pretty unique to my code, right? The data provider, it's in the right format, I know that. This is in the right format, I know that, etc. So I tried to reduce what was specific to my problem and tried to think about what would be the generic search terms that other poor bastards like myself would use to try and solve this. And so that's when I came up with PHP unit missing argument data provider. And shit you not, this is the second article on Google, which takes you second result on Google, which takes you to a Stack Overflow article, and there it is, right there. Was this you, Hannes? Because that would just be too perfect. Okay, reporting. Now, big deal. Okay, this is all super important. If you define the wrong level of error reporting, the worst problem, the worst bug that you can ever find is one that you can't see. Always. If you cannot tell why something is breaking, far worse than it breaking all over the place. Okay? So you need to make sure that your error reporting options are always tuned up to 11 in development, right? 11.5 if you can, and then down to about a 2 or a 3 in production. Okay? So there's a few options that you can do here. Error reporting, log errors, display startup errors, and xdebug.screen. So here is my sort of advice. If this doesn't work for you, you can't sue me. We can all agree on that now. Right, so in development, display errors on all the time. You want to see your errors. You want to see when things screw up. It is so important. But in production, no. Just no. How many people have been browsing a website and they see that beautiful Laravel thing now that they've got whoops in there? Who's seen that error message show up in production? Right? Yes. So it's just so bad. Turn off display errors, turn off all that stuff, because that's for you, the developer. You want to see context. The user wants to see, my credit card should have worked. They don't want to see big scary error message in like all types of red. Display startup errors. This is sort of a last ditch resort. If things aren't working and you can't tell why, turn this on. But for the most part, haven't had much experience with that solving my problem, but it's worth a mention. Error reporting, please, all, always. PHP 5.4 I think has strict rolled into all, but do make sure that you set these so that you can get all the errors in your application. If you're using a dodgy CMS and it is not coding to great standards, then you might see a whole bunch of extra stuff here. But in general, turn it up to 11. The only difference is that if you turn display errors off, but you keep your error reporting on, and you use a logging framework like inside of Laravel, or you use Monolog on its own or something, then you can still get all the errors, but you can display something friendly to the user instead of log errors, very important. Turn it off in development. You don't need to log them that way because you'll see them, but turn it on in production. And Xdebug Screen is something I found out about a couple of days ago, and it is so handy. Who here has run into a problem where they were trying to debug somebody's crafty old spaghetti PHP4 code, and it used the error suppression @ sign in front of the code, and that's why you weren't seeing any errors? Right, Mr. Paul Jones, who else? You must all have seen it. There is an option in Xdebug to help you. Got your back. So, turn it on in development, xdebug.scream. That'll mean that it ignores error suppression. It suppresses the error suppression. It's so many levels of meta. It's great. In production, turn it off. Okay. General notes. Very quick. Always be patient. Don't murder prostitutes. Not a good idea. Make sure your problematic code is actually being executed. So many times I've been trying to solve problems, and the code I was looking at was not the code being executed. Bad situation. Always check your premises. Assuming makes you an ass. Share your experiences that people can help you. And if you want more info, you can go to the lanyard link or spam me at danielcopping@gmail.com, and I will exchange advice for whiskey. So that's good. Single malt's usually good. Any questions? All right.
Danny, very good presentation.
Thank
and
you.
I'm glad that this topic has been addressed because I feel it's of course very important.
Yeah.
My question perhaps is more in the way of a comment, but I would invite your views on that. First of all, just at the outset, I think that one important aspect of a component you've mentioned, which is your right choice of IDE, can reap benefits because, as most of us know, one of the unfortunate disadvantages of PHP is that many of your errors will only show up at runtime. Bad syntax doesn't get caught before that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you agree with me, depending on your right choice of editor IDEs, one of the benefits is that it will highlight for you problems with your syntax in case you made a typo.
Definitely. I think that PHP Storm is like just below sentience.
Yes.
So PHP Storm, like those JetBrains guys are so great. They've really, in the past couple of years, made PHP Storm just this absolutely incredible editor, and it picks up really crazy things that you would never have guessed. So yeah, that makes a big difference. And because our language sucks and is interpreted at runtime, there's a lot of things that you can miss.
Now, as regards my actual question, I think it was implied in what you were talking. You actually touched on it in the course of your talk. I'd be curious to know, in your present environment, how often do you have a build and how big the steps are? Because it seems to me, certainly speaking for myself, that one way of reducing the incidence of bugs is that I don't make too big changes. Obviously, this can be taken to an extreme. I don't consider a semicolon or a new punctuation.
Can we try to get to the question quickly? There's not a lot of time. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, don't you believe in the merits of doing small changes and testing immediately?
Yes. Yeah. I'm a believer in Paul's church. You know, it's iterate quickly, commit, pass to QA, test, make sure that what you're doing is actually fixing things and not breaking other things. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
You were discussing frameworks and debugging. So different frameworks obviously have some debugging extensions. What's your thoughts on those, or what's are good ones, or don't you recommend them?
What examples? Like Symfony with the debug bar and things like that? Don't know. Don't really have much of an opinion on that. It really depends on what you're doing. If you want to see how many SQL queries were run during the course of that page, great. I'm kind of talking slightly out of my behind right now because I haven't used that particular feature. But I find that Xdebug handles most of my problems, and in most cases that's usually fine. Or some other sort of low level debugging instead of having something in the browser. I don't always work in the browser, so yeah. In most cases that's usually fine. Or some other sort of low level debugging instead of having something in the browser. I don't always work in the browser, so yeah.